Good evening and welcome to Alan's Italy. Tonight we are going to take our last look at Tuscany and indeed our last look at the shows that I put together based on the trip we took last May and June. We're going to be going to the Tuscan towns of San Miniato and Vinci. Let me bring this up. So there it is, Alan's Italy show number 109, A Day Out in Tuscany, Part 2. Last time was Part 1, and we went to the towns of Monte Carlo and Serravalle, and today we're going to be going to San Miniato and Vinci, and that what you see in the distance there is the town of San Miniato. Now, the story is that we're staying with Lydia, and the first part I designed the trip to Castelnuovo. The second day, which was the Monte Carlo day, Lydia decided where to go. This time, I decided that we would go to these two places. And actually, I got the idea for San Miniato from something Laura had mentioned to me several years ago. She was looking through a newspaper or a magazine and came upon, probably a magazine, came upon this beautiful town, and the town was San Miniato. And I said, well, someday I will take you there. I've been there before, as I'll discuss in a moment, and I've also been to Vinci. And I said, boy, it'll be a great trip. And so, many years ago, I said this would be a great trip to go to San Miniato and then to go to the town of Vinci. So these are the two places we decided on, and that's what we're going to look at on this show. The first thing I want to mention, though, this is the church, the cathedral in the town of Monte Carlo. And one of the things I failed to mention during the show when we were discussing this church is that, many facades, that's the front of the church, many facades in Tuscany are unfinished. And that's always struck me as being something very, very interesting. And there are many, many churches throughout Tuscany that are unfinished. And I decided to do a little research. And I came to the conclusion, along with the help of my friend Luca in Florence, that when churches are built, a tremendous amount of money it was put into the building of the cathedral. And they always ran out of money at the end and were unable to do the facade. So the facade was always an afterthought and something that they kept in mind, but would be done much, much later. And by much later, I mean sometimes as much as 100 years or more later. So this is the church in Monte Carlo, and you can see that it has an unfinished facade. This is what a facade is supposed to look like, and indeed, this is the church of the church of Santa Maria Novella in Florence, and the facade was actually done way after the actual church was designed, and the facade, I believe, was done by Leon Alberto Battista. But this is probably the most famous unfinished facade in Florence that I'm aware of, and this is the Church of San Lorenzo that was designed and built by Brunelleschi. The facade was left out and was designed by Michelangelo, and it was never completed. So here we are, in the year 2015, and the facade of one of the most famous churches in all of Florence, the Church of San Lorenzo, which was the Medici parish church, which is odd because the Medicis spent a lot of money. They contributed a lot of money as the patrons of this church, and yet they never finished it. So it's very interesting, and I just thought I'd mention that. Incidentally, in front you see the stalls of selling leather goods and so on, and that's part of what's known as the San Lorenzo market. It's a market that runs all the way around the church. It's the biggest market in Florence, and in fact, the next show we'll be doing, I'll be talking about that. I'll tell you about that later. Okay, so after the show, the last show, my engineer and videographer, Ellen, asked the question. She heard of Monte Carlo, but that's not the Monte Carlo that I was doing in the show last time. So I decided to discuss a little bit about the two Monte Carlos. And the Monte Carlo in Monaco, this is the Monte Carlo in Monaco. And as you could see, it is an absolutely stunning city located right on the Mediterranean. And although Laura and I drove past this town on our way between Nice and the Italian border, we never actually went into the town. Although we did stand right at this point, really, to just take a look at the town. And this is the famous Monte Carlo, that is the capital of Monaco, which is a little country right at the very, very tip of France, between France and Italy. And of course, and it's right over here. Let me show you on the map. So this is the border line between France and Italy, and you could see that Nice is right over here, and right next to it is Monte Carlo. So we passed Monte Carlo going from Nice over here to Ventimiglia and then around the Italian Riviera to get to our final destination on that trip of Santa Margherita, which is near Porto Venere, excuse me. No, Portofino, right over here. There are two Portos. I get those confused. This is Portofino, which is near Santa Margherita, and this is Porto Venere, which is much further south of Cinque Terre. Now, the Monte Carlo we actually spoke about during the show was right over here in this region. Okay, so this was, if you remember, this was the show from last time, the famous castle, entering the town and approaching the campanile of the cathedral, which was straight ahead, one of the medieval gates to get into the town. Okay, so these are the four shows. The first show was number 106, which was, several weeks ago, where we went to Lucca, and then 107 was Castel Nuovo, and then 108 was Monte Carlo and Serravalle, and today will be show number 9, San Miniato and Vinci. So here we go. San Miniato. So here's where Lydia lives, in Chiesina Uzzanesi. And we drove south, pretty much directly, south, slightly to the east, to San Miniato, which is right over here. And then we drove north-northeast to the town of Vinci, and then, of course, back to Lydia's house. So this is very similar to the trip we took, the previous time when we were also kind of in that triangle. This is a larger view of that whole area. This is Vinci, right over here in the middle. And here you see Florence off to the east, not very far. And here's San Miniato down here. Here's Lucca and Pisa off to the west. So this is the area that we will be covering on this particular show. This is a picture that was taken of Lydia and me in the year probably 2001, but possibly 2002. Not totally sure. I thought this picture was taken, this photo was taken of Lydia and me in San Miniato, but it was not, according to Lydia. This is probably, in her opinion, the town of Vinci. And this is on that same excursion when we were driving around that area of Tuscany. We were completely lost, and we stopped in one of the towns and asked these two gentlemen for directions. So this is a photo that I snapped of that trip. But here we are in Lydia's house now. This is, last year. And we got on the road, And there are the signs. I love signs, as you know, taking me to the various places throughout Italy. And here is the town of San Miniato. And, San Miniato is a very historical town. It is on the main route between Europe and Rome, Pisa, Florence, Lucca, and Siena, and because of that was exposed to hostile and friendly armies for several hundred years. The archaeological evidence dates the town back to the Etruscan times, but the first historical evidence that such a town existed was made in the year 786, so the 8th century. Florence took over San Miniato in the year 1347. Napoleon took over the town in the 18th century, so San Miniato has kind of been the focal point for, armies that were going through either north-south or east-west. And this is the town, and we drove into the town, and, it's quite a typical-looking Tuscan town at this point. There's the pharmacy over there on the left with that green cross on the top. And we parked the car right in this area. There's the car that, Lydia's car. We parked it and began walking through the town, headed on a gentle rise going upward. And we wound up on this street and in this piazza. This is one of the main piazzas in San Miniato. That's the Bishop's Palace, straight ahead. And this piazza was so enormous that, we needed to take a few pictures in order to capture, the essence. And you can't really capture it. Laura and I were looking at this earlier, and you can't really grasp the enormity of this piazza, but that gives you an idea of at least the right side of it, and that's the left side. Another photo. And those steps will play a very important role in a few seconds, because those steps lead up to the area that we wanted to go to, which was the Piazza del Duomo, which would give us unbelievable views of the countryside. So we went up those steps and found ourselves on this piazza. And that restaurant straight ahead plays a very important role in a few minutes on this show. And during our stay in San Miniato, that's where we actually had lunch. But this is the main church. This is the cathedral that was first built in the 12th century and made into it started out as a church, and then when it gained prominence in the town, it became the actual cathedral, the main church in the town in the 17th century. It's actually famous for a very sad occurrence that happened during World War II, when 50 of the citizens of the town sought refuge in the church, and the church was actually bombed. And some reports indicated that it was done by the Germans, some by the Americans who were, conflicting with the Germans. It doesn't really matter, because it was a terribly tragic event in which 50 people were killed. And you can see right over here, very difficult to see, but there's a little plaque right outside the church commemorating that tragic event. And we went into the church, and that's what it looks like. Let me go back for a minute. This facade, as you can see, is also unfinished, so it's really amazing. But the inside, and you can see why they ran out of money, because most of the money was put into the building of the inside and of the church itself. It was quite beautiful, as you could see. And these are the views you get by standing in various places on that piazza. Really beautiful views of the surrounding countryside. And this is really why, we went to San Miniato. That is the Tower of Federico. But we didn't go. You're allowed to go up it, and you get even more spectacular views, but we did not go up. And I don't, it was all steps going up, and we were just not, in the mood to do that. But you get these are the views from the piazza again, and this is what floats our boat. We like going to these magnificent Tuscan towns, spending a couple of hours, and looking at the rooftops and the countryside, and of course photographing. This is a very nice view of the plains around San Miniato, and as you could see, it's not as in central Tuscany with the rolling hills, more of flat plains with mountains over there in the distance. Another view. This was a photo that somebody took of of the three of us right by the wall, and we were getting pretty hungry by this point. We did a few more photographs of some things, and this was actually the pathway getting up to the top. And there's the restaurant, and we went into the restaurant, and we don't always, it's very tempting to have every meal pasta and pizza and things like that, but we try very hard not to do that. And this is Lydia and I sitting at the table with Laura taking the picture, and this is what we actually had. This was a insalata con tonno, which translates in English as a salad with tuna on it, and this was quite delicious, as if I remember correctly. We had a very, very nice meal. And then we started on our way down, and this is from the top, from that piazza, looking down at the town itself. A very pretty town. And the interesting thing about this is that we like to go into these medieval towns that look like, of course, they've been around for hundreds of years. And yet here, and you get that view when you look here. But if you look off to the left, you see a restaurant with modern tables. So it's a very interesting dichotomy between the medieval and the modern. And, we like those kinds of scenes very, very much. Through this really beautiful arch of one of the gates of the town. There was a market going on in the piazza where we parked the car off to the side, and this stand actually sold candy. And as we left the town, we took one last photo of a really beautiful view of the town of San Miniato from a distance. And then we went to the town of Vinci. Now, people go to the town of Vinci usually for two reasons. One is for the, once again, magnificent views of Tuscany, which you could see right there, right from the top of the town of Vinci, but also for the reason that Leonardo da Vinci was born in this town on April 15th, 1452. And Leonardo da Vinci, of course, arguably is one of the most famous personages that you can, possibly imagine. He was actually, this is very interesting, he was not born in the town of Vinci. He was actually born in the town of Arciano, which is about 2 miles just north of the town. He's the son of a notary by the name of Piero da Vinci. In those days, they didn't have surnames very often, so they just simply took the name of the town they came from. So his father was Piero da Vinci. He was Leonardo da Vinci. His mother was a servant woman by the name of Caterina. When Leonardo was 14 years old, he showed an interest in art, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But when he was 14 years old, in the year 1466, the year that Donatello passed away. He worked in the studio of Verrocchio, who was Donatello's pupil. And Verrocchio had a really very, very famous workshop. And not only was Leonardo apprenticed to Verrocchio, but also Ghirlandaio and Perugino and Botticelli. And this was the place to be. It was right in the center of Florence, at the heart of the 15th century, which was the very heart of the Italian Renaissance. And, Leonardo evolved into the following characteristics, and I'm going to read all of the things that I've been researching about Leonardo. So he was a painter, he was a sculptor, an architect, a musician, a mathematician, an engineer, an inventor, an anatomist, a geologist, a cartographer, a botanist, and a writer. Truly a Renaissance person. And quite amazing. So the very first time I mentioned Leonardo da Vinci on this show was on Alan's Italy, was show number 46, in which I spoke about the secret treasures of Florence. And this is not related to Leonardo. This is the church of San Marco, which is the Fra Angelico Museum. But this is the reason I'm focusing on this, because we actually went into, in Florence, the Leonardo da Vinci Museum. And one of the great things about that museum is that it contains models, replicas of some of his inventions. These aren't the actual inventions, these are reproductions. And the museum is wonderful. It lets you actually look at the actual inventions and even play with them to a certain degree. So Leonardo, of course, invented the parachute. This is before the era of airplanes. So, but he invented the concept of the parachute, and there is the prototype that he created. He also invented the first tank, and that's what his version of it looked like. You could see that it's armored, and it has those very large wheels. He invented the bicycle, the machine gun. This is actually more similar to what a Gatling gun looked like, but this is his version of the first machine gun, the first cannon. And it needs to be mentioned. You can see some of the other inventions there where you could actually play with them. It's really fun. And it's not only fun for children, but it's fun for adults. We really had a very good time here. But Leonardo worked for a lot of kings who hired him for his genius in creating weapons of war, unfortunately. And that's why, many of his inventions are related to warfare. So this is one of them. But this is a painting that was actually done by Verrocchio. And you see the two little angels over there on the left side. And that's the part of this painting that is attributed to Leonardo. So the painting was actually done by Verrocchio, but those two angels were painted by Leonardo, and pretty much indicated as being his first work that he ever did. Some of the other work that he did an extraordinary Annunciation, which is located in the Uffizi Gallery. I just love this one, mainly because it has beautiful detail on the landscape, and it also has amazing detail on the, where the Virgin Mary is on the right side. There's a table. You see that table right in front? And that has just extraordinary detail. And I just love looking at this painting. This is also a painting in the Uffizi, but it is unfinished, as you could see. And this is an Adoration of the Magi that was never completed by Leonardo. This is, of course, his famous Last Supper, which is an extraordinary work, not in Florence, in Milan, at the Church of Santa Maria delle Grazie. And this is, of course, an amazing work, as is probably his most famous work, which is the Mona Lisa, which was, um, it wound up at the Louvre, even though it was painted in Florence. And I've seen, fortunately, I've had the opportunity of seeing all of the work, most of the work of Leonardo. Leonardo's paintings mostly. Okay, so here is the town of Vinci. And this is where we start out our trip. We come into town and we came right up to here, parked the car, and then went to a piazza over here with the church in which Leonardo was baptized. But his home, which was our final destination, is actually out here in the town, in what was the town of Anciano. Okay, so we're going to start coming into the town of Vinci, and this is what the town actually looks like. And you're driving into town. It's really no different from many other Tuscan towns. I like this though. I like coming into a new Tuscan town and really getting, a flavor for it. And then we parked the car, walked up this walkway, and found ourselves in this piazza. And this is the Piazza del Guidi. And you see there's and it was designed by an artist by the name of Mimo Palladino. And this is right next to the church. And that building you see over there in the distance, in the distance, is the museum, which has a lot of things related to Leonardo. And that sculpture you see right over there in the front was actually done by Palladino. And there's a close-up of it. And that's what the street looked like that we came up in order to get to this spot. You could see the piazza over there on the left side. And our first goal was the Chiesa di Santa Croce, the Church of Santa Croce, which was the church in which Leonardo was baptized. And there's another semi-finished, unfinished facade. And this again is a very pretty church. But it is mostly known. Oh, here's another thing that's very interesting. This was a sculptural cycle that was done right in the vicinity of the baptismal font that Leonardo was baptized in. And it was actually done by the sculptor Cecco Bonanotte, who is an internationally known sculptor who also is famous for having sculpted the doors of the Vatican Museum in Rome. And here's another work that he did. Actually, this is, I believe this is a replica of the Last Supper that Leonardo painted that I showed you a little earlier. But this is a sculptural version of what, that looked like. This very well could be Adam and Eve, with the apple on the tree and the snake, climbing up the tree. So it's all based on biblical stories. And here is the font, the baptismal font, in which Leonardo da Vinci was baptized in the year 1452. There's a close-up of it. And, this is, quite amazing. To be standing in a place of history like this is really quite a thrilling experience. And then we came out, and, we're looking at the scenery was just spectacular, as you could see in the distance. And, we like taking pictures of the stucco roofs. in every Tuscan town that we go to. And then we began driving out of town, going towards the north. There's a very interesting looking building. And this is the town of Vinci. Right in the center of town. And we parked right over here in close proximity to Leonardo's, the house that he was born in and grew up in. And because so many visitors come to this spot, in fact, 500,000 people visit the town of Vinci on an annual basis. So they put up this this market kind of right in the parking lot, and you can't help but wander around and take a look at the various things that are being sold. But we began, taking pictures of the views, the landscape from that point. And we walked along this road in the direction of the house, Casa di Leonardo, the house in which Leonardo was born and raised. And that's Lydia and I walking down the path headed towards the house. And there is that was our goal. That was the house in which Leonardo lived. That's a better view of it right over there. It was really a beautiful house, and you could see the stonework on that house is absolutely magnificent, with the plaque on it indicating that it was Leonardo's house. This is the piazza area right in front of the house, one of the entrances. And we just thought the stonework was magnificent. And you come into the house, and it's a museum. So the first thing you see is a bust of Leonardo with some descriptive materials on the wall related to his life. There was a video that we watched, which spoke about Leonardo's life, and then there was what's called a hologram. Now this was very, very interesting because it actually looks like a person. If you look at it quickly, you'll see that it looks like a person dressed up as Leonardo da Vinci. In reality, it was what's called a hologram. And I looked this up on the internet and came to the conclusion that it's created by lasers and various, different types of lighting. And it's created to look exactly like Leonardo. And this person was actually speaking with the people in the audience, as you could see, speaking about his own life, as if he were actually Leonardo da Vinci. So there you see the video off to the right with the hologram straight ahead, looking like Leonardo. And, after we finished in there, we began to then head out. And this is the road we took. We thought this was a very nice picture to take because it shows you the road, a very, very typical Tuscan scene. And, when you look around from his house to the various mountains, it's very difficult not to believe that, you're looking at scenery and feel kind of this deep connection between Leonardo and what he grew up looking at and the actual landscape. And it's really, quite a thing. Picturing, we're standing right there looking at the same pretty much view that Leonardo looked at 500 years earlier. And it was really very, very beautiful scenery. And now we're heading back into the town of Vinci. On the road now, headed back towards Lydia's house to the, let's see now, to the west, back to Chiesina, into Lydia's town, and back to her house. And, you know, if you're wondering, when we stayed with Lydia for the 4 days that we stayed with her this last trip, you know, what do we do with all our time when we get back? This is what we do. We basically, you can see some food there in the front. So we're basically eating and checking our emails, Lydia on her computer and me on my phone. So this is a typical scene in Lydia's house when you know, we get back to it. And once again, we thank our dear friend Lydia for driving us all around Tuscany, and probably doing it again on the next trip that we'll be taking this coming May and June. And that, you know, really is the end of the shows that we brought back from our last trip. So the next show that I'll be doing will be shows that I've developed exclusive of that trip that we took. And this is going to be what the next one's going to focus on. Something that I've always wanted to do, which is talking about shopping in Florence, which is a very interesting concept, because I would say that, you know, 90% of all people who go to Florence, and they go there, you know, for the churches and the museum and the history and the incredible food and scenery, but they also go for the shopping. And I once remember reading something that somebody described Florence as being one giant department store. And it's interesting because, you know, we've done a lot of shopping on our own. And, you know, I've been going to Florence now for 22 years. And, you know, I partake in a lot of the shopping, and I'll be focusing on all the different things you could see and buy when you're in Florence. So, once again, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed those last, I believe, 12 or 14 shows that we did on the trip we took. And tune in next time. And for now, buonanotte e buona fortuna.